the informals a month ago, the first round of negotiations, you will have known that there was concern about the certainly attack on human rights, trying to remove them, equity principles, Rio principles, common but differentiated responsibility, precautionary principle. All of this was under attack. Human right to water, which I'm happy to announce, only had one country stand to delete. I'm sad that it's Canada, who David holds a Canadian passport and I do too. Could announce it, but I live there. No. So, yes, a stay and fight. No, but we have, so there still is a concern that human right to water might be an issue. But we also know that there have been attacks on other rights, and again, all the other real principles. So I think that we have to keep organizing, and part of this is that it is going to be a roundtable discussion looking at strategies and how we can work together. The other part of this is that it's not just about what's going on here in New York. We have to also link with others, including other UN agencies, more broadly with the special rapporteurs who sent a letter, the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And this is not just also about human rights, of course. So our work here in the next hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half, is going to be quite broad. We have Yokeling from Third World Network will take us through some aspects of it, and then we'll open it up for a more roundtable discussion. So the last line here I want to read, it says, participants in this roundtable will share their analysis of the latest draft of the outcome document for Rio Plus 20 and the state of play in the official negotiations, and strategize how to link campaigning efforts outside of lobbying efforts inside and vice versa. There is a list of organizations that I want to thank for co-sponsoring this. IBON International, who's done great work. Can't have a representative here right now, but I'm Anil Naidu, I'm with the Council of Canadians. The People's Coalition for Food Sovereignty, France Libertes, I don't know if Andre's here, Roots for Equity, Global Forest Coalition, Food and Water Watch, Third World Network, Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, and also Dawn should be on this list as well. So as we go around the table, people can introduce themselves, and let's have a really rich discussion. Going from David's right, maybe we can keep going. Introduce yourself.
Darcy O'Callaghan, Food and Water Watch.
Try to speak loudly, please.
No.
Darcy O'Callaghan, Food and Water Watch, based in DC.
Daphne Weicham, Institute for Policy Studies, DC.
Alessandra Brett from the Mission of Liechtenstein. Run here.
And Becky Harbour, work for the Civil Society Division at UNDP.
Catherine Pierce from the World Future Council based in Brussels.
Gary Corbett, ABO representative of the Congregation Investigator.
Jim Go from Oxfam. Studies from the Swedish Nation.
I'm Bernard Frey from NGLS, United Nations Non-Governmental Liaison Service.
I'm Melanie Slater. I'm a student here in New York. I'm at the MGCY and Human Impacts Institute.
Robert Pollard with Information Habitat, where information lives here in New York.
I'm Yu Kitanabe, Japan Center for Sustainable Environment Society.
Good evening, friends. I'm Jitin Yumna from representing the People's Coalition of Food Sovereignty.
This is Wali Hazar, representing Roots for Equity of Pakistan.
Alina Ward from the Foundation for Democracy and Sustainable Development, which is based in London in the UK.
I'm Yukling from Third World Network in Malaysia.
I'm Melinda Ching Simon from the Office of Partnership for Human Rights based in New York.
Judith Arenas from the International Development Organization based in Rome.
CC Charles King, I represent Voices of African Mothers and Black Farmers Agricultural Association.
I'm Peter Mann from Why Hunger and IPSA.
Marcus Orellana with the Center for International Environmental Law, Seattle.
I'm Nico Luciani with the Center for Economic and Social Rights.
Please start back here, please.
Sandrine Menard from the French delegation at the
I'm Kevin Shomer from the Group based in Japan.
Anna Leshker from the Australian delegation.
Roy Deko from Kenya. Mirab Kenje from New York office.
Negotiations bulletin.
Associate Council of Food International.
Barbara, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Barbara Adams, Global Policy Forum Europe and Social Work.
Behind you.
Jutta Bertrand, nominated with an International Association of Lawyers. It's called Union Internationale des Avocats.
Anita Nair with Dawn Development Alternatives with Women, a South-based feminist organization.
I'm Ping. I also work with Dawn.
Hi, Naomi from Environmental Partnership Council in Japan.
I'm Joseph Fodian from the World Resources Institute and the Access Initiative.
It's Andrea Abreu from France Libertes Foundation.
Maria Martinho from the UN Division for Sustainable Development.
Shinji Onoda, Japan, Center for Sustainable Environment and Society.
I'm Emma Paviels. I'm a student at Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts.
Christine Koda-Jovsta, the Commons Cluster.
Kisia Gonzalez from the International Union for Land Value Taxation, also part of the Common Cluster.
Wonderful. Did I miss anyone? Okay, so it's good to see a mix of member states and specialized UN agencies, NGOs. So this should be a rich discussion, and I'll ask Yokling to kick us off here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anil, and good evening to everyone here. I think what I'd like to do is to perhaps just highlight some of the key areas of concern that many of us in the civil society community have, and this is based on not just the text as such, but that the text and the negotiating positions of the different groupings of countries reflect a much broader trend of a very fundamental, I would say, battle over the future of international cooperation and multilateralism as we know it in the United Nations. I mean, this whole thing about Rio Plus 20 really takes us back to 1992, and those of us who were in the process from 1990 to 92, where we had the Rio Declaration on Principles, Agenda 21, and the 3 legally binding conventions, which were not just environmental treaties, they were sustainable development treaties on climate, biodiversity, land degradation, and desertification. And one of the most crucial achievement of that whole period was, we would say, in terms of the principles, the Rio Declaration at the highest political level was adopted. It was a very difficult set of negotiations, and the dialogue was a very intense one. It was really an environment development dialogue, and it was a North-South dialogue. So when we look back at the principles, actually it is quite remarkable to imagine that there could have been consensus around that set of 27 principles. And today we see, not just in this process leading to the conference in June, but whether we go to the Climate Convention, Kyoto Protocol, any of the treaties, UNCTAD, as we just have been following the fight in Doha, in every one of the fora there is a there's a clear attempt to basically shift that fundamental compact at the global level. So what we see here in terms of the Rio Principles is, instead of reaffirming it, which is what the civil society community is saying, and the developing countries are saying, is reaffirm the Rio Principles, because that's really the starting point, and to build on that, because that has been really where we have developed the level of trust and confidence for global cooperation. However, we see not just a dilution, but there is a danger that there would be actually a rewriting of the Rio Principles. And the Rio Principles that are of concern, of course, primarily for many of us from the developing countries, is the equity and historical responsibility principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. This has been also misrepresented as to say it means it's a way for developing country governments to get out of doing actions. It is not, because we talk about common but differentiated. Everybody has to do, and has to act, has to shift to sustainability, but those who are in a position to do more because of the capacity and the resource and the history of of getting developed because of the unfair use of resources, etc., have to take the lead. So what we find now is that is heavily contested, but the other principles which are extremely important that are also under threat from our analysis is, for example, the Libertes. polluter pay principle was a hard-won principle in the Rio Declaration. Today, when we see this whole emphasis to the private sector role, and here private sector, I distinguish between the large corporations from the small, medium-sized and the family-sized firms and enterprises. Here we see that large corporations have been wooed and invited through the UN system in the last 20 years to become partners and to become financiers and to become leaders in sustainability. We in the NGO community, most of us have never believed that was the thrust that should be relied on. The financial crisis and the role of the big private sector has shown us that you cannot leave the market to be unregulated, that there is no limit to the short-term profit orientation of corporations and financial institutions. And yet, with all that, in this process, we behave as if we have not learned anything from the financial crisis. Today, we see companies like Philip Morris suing the governments of Uruguay, Australia, because these governments dare to have regulation at the national level that will restrict the advertising of cigarettes, because we have this thing called the Tobacco Convention. But these countries are being sued by Philip Morris because Philip Morris claims that their trademark or intellectual property is being violated when you actually put restrictions on tobacco advertising for health purposes. So when we see this kind of things happening, and these are just a few examples, we have many examples in the seed sector, in the medicine sector, and yet we find that there is this big reliance on the private sector to deliver. So instead of polluter pays, there is a trend to say we will actually pay the polluter, because we're talking about how to incentivize, we're talking about market mechanisms that will draw the private sector in, and we don't want to hurt the private sector. So this is something of great concern to many of us. The fact that in March, we had to have this big rights reassertion, and the letter from the 22 UN rapporteurs around the human rights range of human rights in the United Nations. The fact that we had senior officials from UNCTAD to come out to say we need to defend the independence of parts of the United Nations to be different in their analysis compared to the World Bank and IMF and the WTO. There is a huge battle around the United Nations and what it means for the people of the planet. So this is a trend that continues. If we look at a lot of the texts, we continue to see most developed countries pushing the market mechanisms, the market-based options. The fears that we have around the green economy, that the green economy could be another way of actually promoting more commodification of the last of our natural resources. And it's not just commodification. We see debates and discussions in the Climate Convention, in the Biodiversity Convention, where financial instruments that have been used to create the bubble and the financial crisis, like derivatives and all those kind of bubbles that have been created there, we see the same instruments being promoted for environmental services, for biodiversity, and for atmosphere. So these kind of like the carbon market itself in the climate arena is exposed now, not just for by independent NGOs or concerned citizens groups, but even in the Financial Times, you're talking about fraud, you're talking about how it doesn't work, and yet we find that some of these same solutions are being promoted in the real process. So this is something of great concern. The rights issue remain very tenuous. The right to development has been bracketed in the last 2 days, and this is part of the real principles also. So we would like, many of us, to really see, if there's one thing we do not want 2012 do, is to basically walk away, reject, and rewrite history. That would be the worst thing if we go back to Rio 20 years later and to see the loss of all those very important principles of cooperation. Many parties talk about how the world has changed. The world is different. But in some fundamental ways, the world has not changed. We have got huge inequalities, inequity within countries has also increased, and all the more, those guiding principles are very, very important. So this is something that we urge the government representatives sitting in this room to really, we know that there are positions, but within countries, there are also different positions when you're part of a group. And within each country,